In my last video, I discussed tackling ability and how we can use technical criteria to separate good and poor tacklers. Coaches can then use these as coaching cues to develop tackling ability in their players. What I'd like to do in this video is discuss the physical qualities that contribute to good tackling performance and discuss the practical implications for strength and conditioning coaches. This video discusses how physical qualities influence the execution of tackling skill, and it really starts from a paper that we published back in 2009 where we looked at the physiological and anthropometric correlates of tackling ability in rugby league players, and we followed this up with a number of subsequent studies that I'll talk through in this video. Last time we spoke, we discussed the standardized tackling assessment and how we can use coaching cues to assess one-on-one tackling ability in a very standardized situation off-field. And I showed you that the results that we found off-field in our standardized assessment were somewhat predictive of how players would perform during match play. In our subsequent studies, our questions really geared towards how do physical qualities influence the execution of tackling skill, or what is the relationship between well-developed physical qualities and tackling ability. This was one of our first studies where we looked at physical qualities and tackling ability in junior players, and this is a correlation matrix. Basically, what you can see here is that players with better acceleration and muscular power tended to have better tackling ability. When we looked at semi-professional players, we found similar results in that players with better lower body strength, upper body strength, lower body strength relative to their body weight, and upper body muscular power in terms of the plyometric push-up all had better tackling ability. So what it tells us is that players with better upper and lower body strength and power tend to be better able to execute the skill of tackling. And then finally, when we looked at elite level collision sport athletes, we found similar results in that players with better playing experience or greater playing experience, players who were leaner and players who had better muscular power tended to have better tackling ability. So what it tells us is that physical qualities are associated with good tackling ability. If you can have better physical qualities, better strength and power, you're going to be in a better position to make effective tackles. But not all tackles are created equally. No two tackles are alike. Sometimes we make under the ball tackles, as is seen as in this figure, in the upper panel of this figure. And sometimes we make over the ball tackles where we're trying to wrap the ball up. Now, when we make an under the ball tackle, where we're making contact in the target center of gravity, these type of tackles are more closely associated with lower body strength. So if you have good lower body strength, you tend to have good under the ball tackling ability. But the over the ball tackle is more closely associated with upper body power. So if you have well-developed physical qualities or well-developed upper body strength and power, you're much more likely to execute a good over-the-ball tackle. So let's talk a little bit around how coaches can work with strength and conditioning coaches to improve tackling ability. And what I'd like to do is introduce Peter Ryan, who has played over 250 elite rugby games, both in rugby union and rugby league, all around the world. He's worked as a defensive coordinator for the North Queensland Cowboys, the Brisbane Broncos, the ACT Brumbies, and the Queensland Reds. Rhino, how do you work with strength and conditioning coaches to maximise tackling ability? How important is your relationship with strength and conditioning coaches?
So I work very closely with strength and conditioning staff. The power exercises, you can clearly see power exercises coming through in what TC's doing here in the contact. And I have a firm belief that the power exercises are where players become dominant in terms of their contact. And the way that they become dominant is it's very much a power clean type scenario where Tony's he's gone to full extension to get contact. So he drops his height, gets full extension, and then obviously in your normal power clean, you catch the catch, right? So it's a similar action to a power clean, and then to power up through the contact is then a jump squat.
Sometimes we use heavy strength exercises before we go into a power exercise as a form of post-activation potentiation. Do you ever use something like a heavy squat before you go into a tackling skill?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, and for a good example of that, we had a player when I was at the ACT Brumbies in Canberra. We had a player that I thought that really needed to improve his tackle technique. I would turn up to whatever session was available, and I would do, say, 4 contacts on a hit shield. So minimal in terms of what the player was doing outside of the normal session, but and it might have been a speed session. So that would be even more aligned with having that power exercise into the contact. Or that might be a big day of squats and then make him do 4 straight up, explosions through a bag, so that they're doing exactly the same motion that they would do in a squat day or a power exercise like a power clean, and then transfer that into a practical tackle scenario, which then gets the transfer from the gym room to the actual field. It actually more so mental application behind that is that their mindset behind what they do in the gym actually transfers onto the field, which then makes the gym that much more important to the individual.
So you can see that there is a relationship between physical qualities and tackling ability. Players with better developed strength and power tend to be in a better position to able to execute good tackles. So the obvious question then is, could we use strength and conditioning to improve tackling ability? If we improve strength, does that result in an improved tackle ability? And we actually did this project where we put a controlled strength and conditioning program in place. We measured strength and power changes, but we also measured changes in tackling ability. Now, on the horizontal axis of this graph, you can see the change in tackling ability as a percentage. And on the vertical axis, you can see the change in lower body strength measured via the 1RM squat. And there's a significant relationship here of around 0.7, indicating that around 50% of the change in tackling ability is explained through change in lower body strength. So strength training is associated with better tackling performance. And if you can improve strength, and assuming you're working on tackling ability, you'll also result in improved tackling ability. So it's an example of how strength and conditioning can play a direct influence on a sport-specific skill. They can play a direct role in improving a sport-specific skill. Now, this is our off-field measure of tackling ability. How does it transfer? Does this change in strength actually result in improved in-game performances? Now, there's a lot of numbers in this correlation matrix, but if we just look at the 1RM squat versus the number of dominant tackles made in a game, and again, there's a significant relationship here. Players who had better lower body strength tended to make a greater number of dominant tackles during a game. And this relationship is significant. Greater strength, more dominant tackles in a game. So again, there's a relationship between physical qualities and in-game tackling performance. So from a practical viewpoint, there's a number of take-home messages here from this particular group of studies. The first two is that players with better physical qualities have better performances in a standardized one-on-one tackling assessment. And they also have better tackling performances during match play. What we've also shown is that improvements in lower body strength are positively associated with improvements in tackling ability. So, what it tells us is that strength and conditioning coaches can play a direct role in improving a sport specific skill because well developed physical qualities make a meaningful contribution to tackling ability in collision sport athletes. So, we've discussed tackling ability and the criteria that separate good and poor tacklers. We've talked about how different physical qualities contribute to the successful execution of the skill. In the final video, what we're going to talk about is how fatigue can influence the execution of tackling skill and the physical qualities that protect against this fatigue induced reduction in skill.